According to the most reliable source ever, Wikipedia, horror is a genre of fiction which is intended to, or has the capacity to, frighten, scare, disgust, or startle its readers or viewers by inducing feelings of horror and terror. So, it should go without saying that if an anime wants to be horror, it has to have the same capacity to frighten, scare, disgust, or startle, despite having a closer resemblance to Mickey Mouse than anything you're gonna find in the horror section on Netflix. Anime has an uphill battle that it needs to face in order to be considered the horror genre. It has to unnerve you while being a medium that's clearly not real. Live action films have the benefit of realistic visuals. Anime has to make you frightened of a cartoon.
So the silly Canadian man wants to sit here and talk about horror?
Wait, what?
Maybe horror anime wouldn't be so hard to come by if you weren't so squeamish. After all, you can't even sit through something like Parasite.
Well, yeah, but that's because it's body horror, which is a specific type of horror that I'm uncomfortable with.
But that's kind of the point, isn't it? Similar to how dramas are usually ranked on their ability to make audiences cry, horror is revered for its ability to make the viewer be off-put by what's being displayed in a way that stays with them. Body horror is just one of the many ways that we can become unsettled, and after looking at the success of mainstream horror over here in the West with shows like The Walking Dead, it's not that surprising as to why. Through the powers of good live-action acting and impressive practical effects, we get drawn into this sort of uncanny valley. It's this dread of being confronted with something that looks so close to being human, yet clearly isn't, that's enough to make the images stay with you. Because deep down, no one really wants what was done to these characters to be done to us.
It's the uncertainty that perhaps something that appears to be alive actually isn't. On the other hand, it might be the uncertainty that perhaps something that doesn't appear to be alive actually is. Do you want to know why people are so unnerved by dolls? It's because the dolls are modeled after them.
Like you said, animation has to work a lot harder in order to accomplish the same effect, because it's easier to be afraid of something that's emulating real life as opposed to 2D cells of animation. Even manga has the advantage over it, because you can craft so much detail and realism into static panels, compared to the more smooth and basic character models that don't always look like real people. The more detail you're allowed to experiment with, the more you can unsettle your audience, and animation usually needs to compromise that detail for the sake of movement. But what anime lacks in displayed realism, they can make up for that with
fan service?
No, with creativity. Parasite capitalizes on gore and body horror, but it keeps one-upping itself with how creative and brutal the characters can maim each other. I think that's why shows like Attack on Titan are often seen as creative updates to the mainstream zombie formula, particularly at the beginning, because they can take those familiar formulas and give them the impression that they're not holding back with regards to what can be shown to the viewer. And sometimes, just the thought of that can be scary enough on its own. We obviously know what's on screen isn't real in the practical sense, but because animation is capable of displaying things in such a fast and visceral way, it's easier for us to be surprised. Don't believe me? Just compare these animes to their live-action counterparts. Some things you can just get away with in one medium compared to the other, and that goes both ways.
So why are none of those examples remembered as horror anime?
I think it's because the shows themselves don't want to be. Part of the reason why so many people in the community still crave a good horror anime is because we know it can generate the same appeal we've come to expect from a lot of mainstream horror shows. The problem is that they rarely ever maintain that appeal from beginning to end. Titan has horror as a part of its appeal, certainly, but on the whole, it's an action show first, while Parasite becomes bogged down by its environmental messages and weird lackluster presentation to the point where it becomes less about the gore factors. Even if it makes more sense narratively for them to forego that initial direction, these are examples of shows that could have been remembered as good horror anime, but are instead remembered for other reasons. It's just hard to come across something with enough confidence to take that direction all the way to the end.
But can the same thing be said about psychological horror, like Higurashi?
What do you mean?
Higurashi is a series that hits all of the right notes of a horror while not worrying too much about its visual appearance. Heck, a good third of the series watched on its own would look like a Moe Blob slice of life show. but that's only if you cut out said moe blobs going around and murdering one another. Higurashi also tries to do more in the way of unsettling the audience, only instead of using jump scares, dismembered bodies, or copious amounts of blood, it psychologically messes with your head. Not only by showing you this constant contrast with its characters and settings, but also because for a large amount of the series, it leaves you in the dark as to what exactly is going on.
But wait, doesn't Akame ga Kill also hit the same check marks as Higurashi? You're not suggesting that it's a psychological horror, are you?
Put me down! I don't want to murder people!
Firstly, how dare you? Similar to what you said before, just because something possesses elements that are specific to a certain genre does not mean that they have the same intent that's expected of that genre. Akame ga Kill is more of a battle action narrative. Higurashi, on the other hand, makes it clear who is going to survive at the end of each arc by starting with a preview of the arc's climax. But even if you know how each arc is going to end, it still crafts those uneasy environments by making it a story of how we get to that point.
Okay, so it plays with your expectations and lets your imagination run wild. But isn't that more akin to a standard mystery as opposed to a psychological horror?
Yes, but mysteries are about showing that line between reality and imagination, debunking what's impossible and highlighting the possibilities of what can or did happen. Horror, on the other hand, blurs that line.
Terror has its degrees of freshness. The more intense the fear, the more all of the other emotions die. Terror, in its truest sense, is not a static state, but rather a dynamic one. It is the sublime moment when shining hope turns to utter despair.
Horror is similar to mystery because the author needs to be conscious of how much the audience is trying to fill in the blanks. The difference, though, is that the appeal of a mystery stems from the mystery being solved. It's about being presented with a question and looking forward to having that question answered. That's why bad mysteries are criticized, because how we get to that answer, or the answer itself, can leave a lot to be desired. Sometimes the author will feel tempted to take advantage of the fact that they can seemingly come up with anything for the sake of moving us to the next plot point, but if we get from point A to point B in such a hackneyed way, our immersion begins to break, because a good mystery still needs to have some kind of logic in its events. Arguably, a good horror does too, but the difference is in where the focus lies and what the author takes advantage of. While a mystery gets us into a mindset where we want to appreciate the little details, a good psychological horror will be more selective on what details it allows us to see. For example, what is considered one of the most iconic shots from the first season of Higurashi?
Oh, you mean when Rena is walking back to the junkyard with the machete?
Exactly. Aside from the way that it's shot, can you think of any other reasons why this scene felt so unsettling to you in the moment? What happened immediately before it? The main character was told about where a string of murders took place in town, that the bodies were discovered chopped up in various pieces. Up until this point, we'd have no reason to expect anything of Rena when she says she's going to go get some kind of sharp tool so that they can get the Colonel Sanders statue. But now that we know these murders took place in such a specific way, we're given just enough information to think, oh shit, did she have something to do with it? It's that perfect moment where you and the main character are on the exact same wavelength, feeling the exact same feeling of dread and uneasiness at the exact same time. That really does embody a good psychological horror. The best part is that even though we later know that Rena wasn't responsible for that murder, it still serves as the catalyst for us being locked into this suspicious mindset moving forward. It's a feeling of uneasiness that sticks with you well after the show is finished, which is much more potent and impressive than modern standards of horror that rely on jump scares.
But each arc of the series starts with a preview of the arc's climax, and by the beginning of the second arc, we know that everything is just going to reset. So how can you feel uneasy about something that you already know is going to happen?
But do you know exactly what's going to happen? You might think to yourself, what could possibly lead us to that scene? I'd like to argue that sometimes knowing exactly what is coming is more frightening than being surprised. The suspense is in the feeling of powerlessness that comes with questioning the when and the how. This is what made Five Nights at Freddy's and other first-person horror games so popular. It creates an uneasy atmosphere that makes you feel powerless and by cutting you off from the rest of the world. We're limited in our ability to take action, but we're also limited in how much we actually know is going to happen.
Granted, keeping an audience in suspense should be the goal of any writer, but I see what you're saying. There's a difference between wanting to know what's going to happen in the story out of curiosity and being cautious of what gets revealed to you next. Plus, that's assuming that everything we're seeing is even real. It isn't until we get to Season 2 that the answers become clear, but before that, you don't know what to believe. Everything is happening, but there are still things missing, and the show strikes deep into that paranoid part of your brain to the point where you can't even remove it. You look around, question the motives of others when you're in an environment that was previously unknown to you, and start skating that line between what may or may not be real. After all, horror doesn't always need to have a point. Sometimes all it needs is to make you wonder what the point of everything else around you even is, and whether or not you should be scared of them.
That's true. Speaking of, what the hell are you? Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. We hope you enjoyed it. I'd like to give a shout out and thanks to my good friend Mr.AJCosplay for helping me write as well as participating in this video. You can check him out on his YouTube channel, Cartoon Cypher, as well as various social media. Links will be in the description for your convenience. And as always, another major thank you to all of my patrons who support these videos, as without you, they would not be possible. Specifically, though, I would like to thank Yunru, Dova Queen, Robert Chumzai, Calhoun Boy, Siri Yamako, Victor Ekmark, and Joshua Garcia for being especially awesome. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen and others, stay frosty.